You're listening to I Communicate with your host, Mark Altman, on Full Service Radio, AM 830 WCRN. Once again, here's Mark.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue what we were just speaking about with Melissa. And Melissa, it occurred to me during the break what a vicious cycle companies are facing. Because typically when you're facing a lot of turnover, which so many companies are, and how do you quantify a lot? I don't know. I mean, I know you do benchmarking for companies in the areas of retention and recruiting, but that's another issue. But what I want to ask you about is, it feels like the cycle's vicious because the more turnover that happens, the more effort goes into recruiting as opposed to paying more attention to the retention issues so you don't have that problem and how to create the culture and environment. So is that true? And is that one of the areas you're finding companies are asking you to help on, is get to that root cause of the retention issues?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I often have said you can't solve a retention problem with a recruiting solution. So, the retention is really the cornerstone. Just an interesting kind of sidebar, somewhere between 60 and 75% of job seekers are finding their jobs on social media now. So, reviews on, Glassdoor, for example, and those who are looking online for their jobs are also on average looking at least 6 reviews of the company before they decide to, pursue or engage with the company. So if you have a retention problem and people are going out and they're talking online, you're automatically putting a cog in the wheel of your recruiting efforts if you haven't got that under control. So retention is important not only for, keeping the good people you have, but also not, putting a cog in the wheel of your recruiting efforts.
That's interesting. That's a great point. And Melissa, in the end of the last segment, you were talking about profit centers versus cost centers when recruiting. And I feel like one of the challenges companies face when they know they need that staffing support is when they're quantifying the cost. All they really have to compare it to is comparing a company like yours to a ZipRecruiter or an Indeed and LinkedIn and things like that. But like you said, what they're not quantifying are man hours lost. What they're not quantifying is how it's impacting the workloads or others not to fill those positions and the length of time. So how do you help companies understand how to quantify that value? Because to someone like me, it's obvious, but to others, I know they struggle to do so.
Yeah, it can be really hard to kind of wrap your head around, or for some managers, when they're dealing with a budget and, they're looking at spending 20, maybe 25% of the budget that they have for the salary, on the cost of getting somebody into the seat. So, I kind of always go back to ROI and understanding the cost of inefficiencies and the cost of lost time. And really, it's a process that, it's pretty straightforward conversation, but I'll take hiring managers through the process to understand those costs, and then look at, what it would be to invest. And many times, there's clear savings.
So Melissa, let's say some of our listeners out there are a bunch of companies out there that are thinking, hey, I need Franklin Professional Staffing, I need Melissa Glenny. What if, to get them over the hump, to make that call, to reach out to you and ask for help, what are the criteria they should be looking at internally to go, we need Melissa, we need Franklin Professional Staffing and your staff? What should they be looking at to know they need your help?
Well, I think there's kind of 2 ways I can answer that. One is, to just know in general if, you need the help of a recruiter. I think to know that, we need to call Melissa or Franklin Professionals. When I'm looking at fit in a partnership like that, I really feel like shared sensibilities is so critical. When we're working with companies, we really are looking at companies who share our sensibilities and those who desire to create a positive work environment where they see people as human beings, not just human doings. They recognize that people are the most valuable asset within the organization, and they place the value on those individuals. So I think that's first and foremost, because that dictates the way that we operate and the way that we guide our clients through the whole process. it's like you referred to the fast food or fast. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fast food. Yeah,
the fast food staffing agencies. That's definitely one model, and the idea being that you throw enough mud up against the wall and some of it's going to stick, and that's just not the way that we operate because we're on a more individualized level. So there's different ways to go about it, I guess, but I think that understanding the kind of the core values, and as long as the core values kind of line up and there's those shared sensibilities, that's fundamental. The other part of the question, I guess, would be, how do you know that it's time to reach out and get some help? I would encourage anyone to have a conversation if they're curious about whether or not they need the help. That's a lot of times what I'm doing. I've sat down with hiring managers before and said, listen, there's things that I can tell you, very easily that you could try, and you've got, some bandwidth, and I would suggest that you give these things a try. And if they don't work, come back to me and, we can engage. But just kind of figuring out if it's something that you need to have, I would recommend having the conversation with a professional that does it.
Well, and you talked a little bit about the shadowing, and I want to just quickly cover the benchmarking aspect, because I think, Melissa, what happens a lot with companies is they don't really know how to gauge the severity of the problem. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about if you have turnover, is it 2 people, is it 5 people, what percentage of your workforce is turning over? And I think that a lot of them don't reach out because they don't necessarily know how to gauge that. So, mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about how you help companies in that regard with benchmarking.
Yeah, you're so right that they don't when they're in their bubble,
right?
It's
right.
what they know.
Yep.
And all you have is to relate it to is really what has been. Where someone like myself can go in and say, geez, let's talk about call centers. If we're talking about
Sure.
turnover, it's a good example. We can go in and say, geez, the turnover is significantly higher than what we would see on an average, or we could also on the flip side say, you guys might feel like this is high turnover, but we can give you some comparisons to what the industry averages are, or what we're seeing in this particular marketplace. So you're absolutely right. We can help them kind of gauge the severity of the problems and give them some insights on basic directions that they could take. And there's always a variety of solutions, different ways. The way that we work is very a la carte. So there's various levels of service that we can provide as somebody might want to try certain things and see if they work well.
Okay, and that's a great point, and I think that's just it. The comparative assessments, whether it's the job description itself, what the standard retention rate for that job is, or mm-hmm. the industry itself, or competitors. I mean, I think those are all critical things, and I think that kind of information can de-stress people so much because, again, maybe you don't have a problem. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do, but to sit there and wonder whether it's a problem, that's not where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what about trust is such a hard thing for people in business. And so if you are considering hiring a company and you're doing due diligence and you're trying to qualify the right vendor, what are 2 or 3 things that you would say you have the right vendor if blank?
Well, I think if you're getting the vendors through trusted referrals, I mean, that's right out of the gate. I think that's a really good signal. I'm a proponent of references when I'm working with, when I'm choosing vendors for my own business. I like to talk to customers. That can be a difficult thing. It's interesting to me that it's sometimes difficult to get references. And it's always a sure sign when I ask for them and someone hesitates in any way, then that's kind of my answer. And I think that online reviews today are so impactful. I mean, you can learn a lot about a company, but without even talking to anybody. So keeping up on what other people are saying online, I think, is also really helpful.
And under the umbrella, last thought for today, under the umbrella of retention and recruiting, what are the specific expertise you have that you offer as services under those umbrellas?
Under retention and recruiting?
Like direct placement, I know, is one.
Yes, thank you. So direct placement, we have temporary staffing, temp to hire staffing, and a variety of assessments that we can use to help our clients benchmark where their teams are and then implement plans to help them get their teams where they need to be.
So final thoughts for today, everybody. If you are a company, if you are an executive, an HR person, a sales VP, and you know you're having some challenges in retention recruiting, reach out to Melissa. At bare minimum, get that benchmarking assessment, learn a little bit about how she can help and if she can help. And if you're someone seeking a job, there's no downside to reaching out to Melissa to have her be an ally for you. So thank you again for joining us for another edition of I Communicate, Finding Your Voice. This has been Melissa Glenny of Franklin Professional Staffing and Mark Altman of Mindset Go. We will see you next time. Special thanks to our producer, Ted. Have a great day.